So first, I want to emphasize I'm not actually calling Dr. Pill's Redux out or anything. I just think that too many games get unrealistic criticisms, and we gamers need to start factoring in an understanding of the limitations of game development when speaking to developers. Because the fact is that unrealistic requests lead to massive development statements, and massive development statements lead to broken promises. Broken promises lead to bad or broken games, and that's what we all want to avoid, right? So, firstly, Dr. Pill's Redux refers to limited assets, textures, models, that sort of thing. And honestly, I don't know what you were expecting. Hello Games are not a AAA developer. They don't have a gigantic arts department. The entire game was built by 12 people, and that always means reduced graphical fidelity in your games, no matter who's making it. If you add in the fact that they lost the original build data in a flood and had to rebuild the entire game from scratch, then this means that we were all made well aware that the least developed aspect of the game would be assets. Because it had the least time to be made. You can copy and paste bits of old code. You can recall a melody that you've written, but you can't just retrieve a model that you were working on for 6 months. Once it's gone forever. Now, I can't find the link anywhere, and I'm a bit too busy today to go looking for it, but I recalled an interview where Sean Murray openly stated he was worried about players being vexed by repetition. And if you generate 18 quintillion planets worth of animals from a central algorithm, then things are going to look similar. No one goes to Africa, sees a zebra and goes, "Do you know what? That's just a stripy donkey. God, you're a lazy bastard." It's unrealistic. And what's quite interesting is that you say the game has no interesting fight mechanics. I think that's probably because the game isn't a shooter. That's like complaining that League of Legends doesn't have a decent resource management system. That's because it isn't an RTS. Yeah, it borrows some of the elements, but the point of the game is entirely different. You say it's clunky and simplistic. Maybe that's to disincentivize you going around committing mass genocide. If combat were fun, then people would spend their time doing it. And if you want the game to be about exploration, then there is an argument to be made for deliberately choosing to underdevelop the combat. Now, I play EVE Online, and I can tell you one thing that I have learned from that game is that if you make it mildly interesting for people to kill something in game, then people will kill it. An interesting point you bring up is that the UI is love it or hate it, and well, fair enough. I can't argue with that, can't say anything about it. The fact is, UI design can always be improved. Just look at The Witcher 3. Right the way up to the last patch of DLC, they were improving the UI, and that's something that everyone should get in the habit of doing. And this is something I really wanted to talk about. Something you brought up was texture popping. And that's because texture popping is something that people have been complaining about a lot recently. Black Desert Online, The Division, No Man's Sky, etc, etc. There's a whole bunch of games in this field. And all I can say about that is deal with it. The larger and more detailed and more complex your game is, the more texture popping you are going to get. And all gamers need to learn this. That is a technical limitation, and the only way for a developer to avoid that is to deliberately go through a game and hide or obscure the things that are likely to pop to give it, extra render time. If you ever wondered why in a game you have to get past some sort of obstacle or something before you arrive at a really detailed scene, the answer is extra render time. And the other thing a developer can do is maybe go through a game and give it different renders for different distances. And a great example of this is the Total War games. You're actually looking at a completely different model when you're far away from a battle. And as you get closer, the game will render a higher texture until you're close enough that the game will render the full model and the full texture. You physically cannot do that for 18 quintillion planets. It's literally impossible. Gamers need to accept that if they want good games, sometimes there's going to be a little texture popping. It isn't that big a deal. Now, that's not license for game developers to get lazy and just not optimize their games, but sometimes it has nothing to do with the developer. Sometimes it's just your hardware. So we need to understand that if you're working in the PC gaming field, and because there are such wide differences between people's machinery, sometimes some textures are going to pop. As long as it's not a solid feature of a game that comes from the fact that the developer has been completely and utterly lazy, then we should all endeavor to be a little bit more understanding. And as a second point about graphics, let's look at the biggest indie games of all time. You know, Castle Crashers, Binding of Isaac, Limbo, Pillars of Destiny. You notice anything? Notice how none of these games are high graphics games? And that's because that's what it means to be an indie dev. You don't have tens of millions of pounds. Yes, pounds. Hello Games is a British developer, and we're speaking about pounds here. God save the Queen. Don't have millions of pounds to throw at art. So you have to pick an art style and trust your audience to use their imagination. Hello Games deliberately took a vision of science fiction that predates 2001: A Space Odyssey, before Alien, before Cyberpunk became themes. They chose an art style full of colour because it let them be creative, original and interesting. To say that you don't like it because it doesn't look like space is to entirely miss the point. It was never meant to. And your final point was that the crafting system was simplistic and uninteresting. Do you know what? Yeah, I totally agree with you there. Hello Games clearly did not spend enough time designing something that would fit in for their design model of the game. I mean, I disagree with you on a lot of what you said, but sometimes you were right. So, and this is one of those things that you were most obviously right about. So those are my responses to the criticisms that No Man's Sky is getting at the moment. I want to thank Dr. Pills Redux for actually spending the time to be concise about his complaints. A lot of game players will just be negative about the game, throw up negative response. He took the time to articulate his point, write them out, and I think that's quite commendable, and he gave me the material I needed to express my my responses to the points that people were raising. And ultimately, I again, this isn't me calling out Dr. Pills Redux. I look at this more as a discussion. I quite like talking about games. It's why I have a YouTube gaming channel. It's why I'm on Reddit. And if you think anything else yourself, if you have any criticism of the game, any defenses of the game, join the discussion. Put that in the comments box. Go down to Reddit. I'm still really excited to get my copy of No Man's Sky. I'm hoping to add some content on my channel about that, and hopefully I'll see you soon.